I'm Rebecca Lowe from the IBA, and I'm delighted to have joining us at our London office Sir Robert Worcester. Sir Robert was the founder of the market research company Mori, now Ipsos Mori. He is also the Deputy Chair and Trustee of the Magna Carta Trust and the Chair of the Magna Carta 800th Anniversary Committee. Sir Robert, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Sir Robert, just to start, could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this issue?
In at the deep end is the answer to that. I've been on the Magna Carta Trust for over 20 years at the time I took this on, which was about 4 years ago. And the Master of the Rolls, the head of the civil law, is by charter, the chairman of the Magna Carta Trust. And its objectives are to perpetuate the memory and deepen the understanding of the Magna Carta and all it means to democratic societies all over the world. It's the most important export that Britain, England actually, has ever done because it affects the lives of over 1 billion people in over 100 countries in the world. And on the Wednesday, when he, the Master of the Rolls, asked me to take on this job, I thought I was taking on the British Committee, and having done the Jamestown 400th as co-chairman, 400th anniversary of the first permanent English-speaking settlement in the New World in Jamestown in Virginia, I thought I was taking on just Britain, and I thought, sure, piece of cake. And on the Friday, the Americans were there, the Australians were there, and he announced that I was taking on the world. And I thought, do I say, oh, no, that's not what I agreed, or in for a penny, in for a pound, and I decided to take it on.
So you mentioned there that you think that the Magna Carta is Britain's most significant export. So tell us, why is it so significant?
Eminent jurists, a lot more eminent than I am, and I'm not a lawyer, have called it the greatest constitutional document ever written. It provided the basis of the rule of law, and those things still exist in the American Constitution, for instance, and in the constitutions of most Commonwealth countries, and many others indeed. I saw the German ambassador a couple of years ago at a dinner at Ditchley Park, at the meeting of the good and the great of these things, and I asked him, what's the salience of the Magna Carta in Germany? He said, it's the foundation of democracy. Everybody in Germany, actually, his word for word, everyone in Germany knows about the Magna Carta. It's the foundation of democracy. I'll never forget that response. It took me by surprise. And a month or so later, we had the Japanese ambassador and his wife staying with us over a weekend. And I asked the same question, and I got the same answer. So it's not just Britain and the United States that have their rule of law enshrined following the Magna Carta. And in the case of Articles 39 and 40, due process and trial by jury, and in 40, justice delayed is justice denied, those things still exist in over 100 countries today and affect the lives and protect the lives of over 1 billion people. And where they don't happen, you've got tyranny, you've got genocide, and you've got the work of despots that exist today that act like they're still in medieval times.
There are those who say, such as Lord Phillips, who we spoke to last year at the IBA conference in Boston, that the Magna Carta is more myth than reality because King John had no intention of signing it. It was more about the rights of the nobility than the rights of the peasantry at the time. And it didn't stipulate then that it was about due process or an independent judiciary, or these ideas that we associate with the rule of law now. So what do you say to those
Well,
issues?
In the first instance, I hope he didn't say King John signed it, because he never signed it. He sealed it. Mm-hmm. But I think he was really stretching the point, because you can find in Article 39 a specific promise of trial by jury of your peers or the rule of the land. You can find in Article 40 the principles of justice delayed is justice denied. You can find in the Magna Carta 6 different references to freemen, and 4 of those references make it very clear it is for everyone. And that applies, again, to speak of Articles 39 and 40. There are many other articles. for instance, in this country, they still haven't, this country being Britain, they still haven't come round to what was promised by King John's agreement to sign it, whether he intended for it to continue or not. It promised a standard weights and measures, because at the time, publicans could put their beer, wasn't brewed by hops, and I guess it tasted pretty awful, but they drank a lot of it, and they could put it in any container they wanted. And as the current head of the Britain's oldest brewer told me, the pint was invented on June the 15th, 1215, when King John agreed standard weights and measures. And that's the pint. Courts were wherever the king was. So if you committed a crime in Kent and the king was in Northumbria, you had to go up to Northumbria at that time to be tried. And what's more, if you didn't pay the king an exorbitant sum, 1,600 pounds in today's money, you wouldn't get a hearing at the court. Mm-hmm. And whether you got a fair hearing or not depended on the whim of King John, because he told the judges what to say.
The document, the original document, was annulled, though, wasn't it? Quite soon after it was sealed.
6 weeks.
Yes, and so what document are we really talking about when we talk about the Magna Carta today? Because there are a series of different iterations of it, weren't there?
Oh, yes, yes. The 1215 version, there are 4 still in existence. 2 in the British Library, used to be in the British Museum. And in 1957, on my first visit to this country as a serving American officer, coming from Korea back to the United States by what they called circuitous routing, because I wanted to stop in Britain on the way back. My first morning, I went to the British Museum to see 2 things, the Magna Carta and the Rosetta Stone, because to me the combination of the rule of law enshrined in the Magna Carta and the Rosetta Stone signifying communication outside the village were the hallmarks of a civilized society. That was the beginning, to me, of civilization. I'm sure that scholars would argue with that, but that's what it means to me as a human being who know I'm protected by the very things that the barons argued. And it wasn't just about the barons, because as I say, of 6 references in the Magna Carta, 4 of them talk about free men. Now, I'm afraid women weren't included. I'm afraid slaves weren't included. And the other day, there was a young chap from the Commonwealth Secretariat who said, well, we don't think that we should, or I don't think, he said, that we should be talking up the Magna Carta too much in the 800th anniversary because it didn't protect the idea of universal suffrage. Well, it took 700 and some years to get universal suffrage, and I was infuriated when I moved to this country as an American, still paying taxes to the United States, and I'd lost the right to vote. And so we got organized a organization called Tax Equity for Americans Abroad. Either give us the vote or let us quit paying taxes, because there's no taxation without representation. And I knew nothing about the Magna Carta 40 years ago when I was arguing the case up to the Speaker of the House, who said, you don't have the vote, that's outrageous. I think we can do something about that. And we called ourselves Tax Equity for Americans Abroad because it was the Tea Party, the second Tea Party. And I pulled the tea bag out of my pocket and I waved it in front of him and I said, well, Mr. Speaker, if you don't give us the vote, we're going to come and dump tea in your harbor. And he was the member of Congress for Boston, Cambridge, actually.
Well, you brought up America, so let's talk a little bit about that, because obviously the Magna Carta was a rallying call during the War of Independence, and was very much the foundation of the legal systems of the colonies originally. So is it even more significant for America, perhaps, than it is for the Brits?
There's not a day goes by, given the job I'm doing of chairing the 800th Anniversary Commemoration Committee, that somebody doesn't say, I wish it was as well known here as it is in the United States. We haven't done the survey, but I always say I doubt that it is because of the influx in the United States of Latinos coming from a different system of law, and coming from a different language. But wherever is English is spoken in the world, it is certainly important, and in many Latin American countries. But it's not so well known, because I was astonished, frankly, when I first did a survey to find out what the British knew or thought they knew about the Magna Carta, that 85% of the country was aware of the Magna Carta, but that's not much. I say not much because it's not very deep. But when I went to go on to ask over 1,000 people, representative sample, where they knew it was Runnymede, when they knew it was 1215 or in the 13th century, and they knew that that King John was the person who was forced by the barons to seal and put into his law the Magna Carta, probably holding his nose at the time. Certainly he wasn't holding a pen.
So you dropped a few statistics there. Well, you took the 85%. I've got a couple here that drill down into this a little bit, and it's your own Ipsos Mori group. It said that more over 55s had heard of the Magna Carta than under 25s, and it was 95% of over 55s and 60% of under 25s. I just wonder whether you feel that's a concern. Are we going to forget about the Magna Carta at some point?
I was disappointed to see those figures, not because they were too low, but because they were too high, because it doesn't give me much opportunity to prove that our commemoration committee has done its job if we haven't increased it. And when I did a straw poll of the committee, the highest guesstimate was 45% overall. And it was actually 85% overall, and as you say, 95% among those over 55. But it was in the school syllabus writ large at the time that the over 55s in this country were taught about it, because it's just not been in the timeline for over a decade, well, nearly 2 decades, in the school syllabus in this country. But the German ambassador, and indeed the Japanese ambassador, convinced me that because it's in their schooling, that nearly everybody has heard of it. But when we further drilled down, and we ask of the 85% overall who have heard of it, whether what it represented, 60% knew it was the rule of law. Very impressive figure, and much higher than we guessed. On the other hand, we've tested it in Trinidad. About 10% have heard of it, and almost no one knows anything deeper than that. In that Commonwealth country, where the basic principles of the rule of law are enshrined in their constitution. I was also in Doha, in Qatar, a couple of months ago, and I found that I haven't done a survey there yet, but I intend to do surveys all over the world to find out these figures and to see how high is up, because we really want to have a baseline now so that 50 years from now, when the commemoration is 850 years, that there'll be even higher figures than there are today.
So that's where the real challenge lies. It's the rest of the world. You think not the UK, not the US specifically, but all these other places where we're seeing echoes of the Magna Carta.
I don't take it that way. It's all a challenge for me as chairman of the 800th Anniversary Commemoration Committee, and for my entire committee, which has representatives from all over the world on it. An advisory board that, for instance, last year's Commonwealth president, the Prime Minister of Trinidad, is on that committee, as are others, people in the United States, people in Canada, and all over the world.
So you've touched on it just then, but do you feel that, that there is a valid recognition of the Magna Carta in other parts of the world? I mean, you talked of some places where you think that there's a very low recognition. Are there other places that obviously there are resonances, echoes of the Magna Carta that you feel they should know more, that really there's work to be done? I
don't have the polling evidence yet, but I know it's very high in Australia particularly, who have their own copy of the 24 extant copies. One is in Canberra. And that raises automatically the profile of it. And it's actually in Canberra because that's the seat of government of Australia. And So people are more aware of it perhaps there than they are in Canada, but the Canadian, because you've got Quebec, but then the French have a high knowledge of it. One of the first speeches I was asked to give was to the English-speaking Union in Paris, in the Senate. And it was
You're a governor of the English-speaking Union, is that correct?
I was a
Yes.
governor of the English-speaking Union, yes. I'm no longer in that
Right.
job. I've pretty well set aside everything else I was doing to take on the Magna Carta. It's the biggest job I've ever had in my life, and I relish it.
You've spoken a lot about the rule of law, and I'd just like to get a little bit more on that specific phrase, actually. It's a term that we hear a lot, and at the IBA's annual conference last year, the US Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer made a speech about the Magna Carta, and he said the best way to understand this term is in terms of what it's not. And he said it's not despotism, it's not arbitrariness, it's not autocracy, it's not unreasonableness, and so forth. I mean, do you agree? Is that the best way to define it? How would you define it?
He's putting it on the negative. I bow to his wisdom. He's a constitutional professor, of course, and he's as deeply immersed and committed. And when I exchanged emails with him to see if he'd be on the advisory board very early on, because I knew of his reputation, I got an email straight back saying, of course I will. Then when I met him a couple of years later in Washington, his first question to me was, why haven't you asked me to do anything? So now I have, because I hope that Justice Breyer will be joining us, along with Lord Neuberger, the President of the UK Supreme Court, the Lord Chief Justice of the New Zealand Supreme Court, and with a group of representative barons and bishops dressed in their 1215 armor on the one hand and hassocks on the other, in the dock, as we say, being charged with treason, therefore the death penalty, with a nasty King John as the witness for the prosecution of these rebels and ruffians, particularly the northern barons who caused him such a lot of hassle with the First Barons' War, and the people who got him into that situation in Runnymede where he was forced to seal it in the second place. Having said that, when I gave the 2005 Lincoln Cathedral Magna Carta talk, I said I couldn't go along with Article 51. I looked around the room to see if there was any glimmer of recognition, not a bit of it. I said, you know, Article 1, when King John was forced by the barons to pledge to banish all foreign-born knights, and just having had my knighthood that year, I didn't want to give it up because I'm certainly a foreign-born knight. So maybe they had their eye on me specifically in 1215 when they wrote in that clause to get rid of me. But now they can't do it without due process of law in a court that is in a fixed place before independent judges.
So you're personally invested in this?
I certainly am, as you may have noticed. We've got a coin. We've got hopes that there will be other countries besides Britain who will be producing coins. There's a wonderful chap named Albert Sidney down in the Caribbean who is designing one for Guyana, one for Barbados, one for St. Vincent, one for Trinidad, and one for two more, 6 in all, I think, as we speak.
Oh, fantastic. That brings me on to my next question, which is the activities that you're planning between now and next year, and also the activities on the day itself. Do you want to give a little bit more information about that?
Let me take the day first. The Queen will be with us. Her Majesty will be with us from 10:30 to 11:30 for the rededication of the memorial and for a few words about the importance of it to the royal family. Prime Minister, we trust, will be with us. I hope the Vice President of the United States will be with us, and other country heads of state. There will be about 5,000 people, we believe, at Runnymede that day. Somewhere between 800 and 1,200 VIP guests that will be seated and enclosed. There will be, as we have to, because of the kinds of people who are coming, it'll be a fairly tight security. And then there will be local school children, local communities, local church groups and the like. There'll be representatives of all the Magna Carta cathedrals on that day. It's a Monday, it's a working day. The police are going to block off the access to Runnymede and run buses in from the train stations and from the outer parking and the lot. I was with the Secretary of State for Defense this morning, and when I said we'd like to have a fly past, he said, brilliant idea. So I expect that we'll have the Red Arrows if they're in the country, or an equivalent group of tornadoes, or a historical bypass with the Lancaster bomber, the Spitfire, and that sort of thing. Because we're talking about defense of liberty here, aren't we? And that's important, and that's what we're doing. That's what we, I'm afraid, have to do when you've got people who are killing their own people, and the bullies and assassins and despots around the world. We're protecting democracy with the defense that we have. That's on the day. We've got 158 aspirations at last count. There are going to be exhibitions all over the world in cathedrals. There are going to be memorial services about the Magna Carta and evensongs. There are going to be, as I mentioned before, stamps and coins and other visual commemoration activities. There are several plays, a play for kids, a play for adults, a historical play, a modern play about it. There's movies, TV has been commissioned to do films, features, and of course, huge amount of news. In this coming year, there are, as we speak, I believe it's 362 days to go. And it's a challenge every day, and I hope we're up to it.
And so can anyone get involved in these celebrations? I mean, if people want to get involved, want to do something, who should they go to? Who should
everyone, not anyone, but everyone can get involved. I'm hoping that scout troops, there's one scout group someplace, I can't remember where it is, oh no, it's Girl Scouts, that have instituted their own merit badge for the Magna Carta. And I'm hoping the Boy Scouts will do the same, and the mixed scouts as well. I was a scout, but I've kind of lost track of where the scouts are in the gender equality business. There will be parades, military parades. Well, one of the things that is allegedly not in the Magna Carta of today, or not relevant today, I think is very relevant. Let me give you an example close to home. If you were a widow and I were single, widower, and the king would be your guardian, and you didn't want to marry me because he was telling you that you had to, you'd be charged a large fine to stay single. But if it wasn't enough, I would be fined for turning you down, and Tom here would accept you. He'd be asked to pay the king for the privilege of marrying you. And would that happen today? Now, I don't know where it is in the law. I haven't looked, haven't bothered to look, because it would certainly not happen today, and that's not counted among the 304. The English church should be free, due process of law, justice delayed and justice denied, and the freedom of the City of London are the things that are still, as they appeared in 1215, in the law of this country today. But there are another dozen or so that I know are still active in law. Standard weights and measures in many countries is, and certainly the pint of beer is enshrined in this country without any question today. It has to be the pint that's a standard pint in any pub in the country. You can't put it into a bucket and sell it off for that.
So perhaps that's the most important legacy of the Magna Carta that people don't talk about.
It affects the most people.
Yes, quite. It's interesting, you talked about a number of different clauses there, because generally it seems to be believed that only 3 clauses remain of the Magna Carta, but you're suggesting that actually there's a lot more.
I'm not an academic purist. It's the academic purists who say 3, and they're for sure wrong, because there are 4 that are still in law, but I've counted another dozen that effectively are in law. And of the times that the word freeman is used, there are 6 places in the Magna Carta, in the 4,100 words of the Magna Carta. It's very short, actually. I mean, compared to the tens of thousands of words in the EU Constitution, there's only 4,100. It's the same as the American Constitution if you don't count the amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights and the like.
It's interesting you mentioned the US Constitution, because I'm wondering whether you feel the US legal system with its written constitution is perhaps more true to the spirit of the Magna Carta than the UK legal system with its common law system and unwritten constitution.
It certainly is in some ways, but it has the disability of being inflexible, the US Constitution. It's very difficult to amend the American Constitution. The 4 ways that you can amend it, I don't think 3 of them have been used in 100 years. And the burden of going around, it's like how the Constitution was originally set up. It had to be endorsed by all 13 colonies. And New Hampshire didn't even want their own state constitution. They just wanted to be free in New Hampshire in those days. And there was a question whether they were going to have, my ancestors were going to have its own Constitution of the United States in 1789, finally agreed by New Hampshire as the 13th colony to sign up. So it has strengths. The unwritten Constitution, on the other hand, is much more flexible, and we don't even really know what it is. And there's a program in current now for a man named Graham Allen, Member of Parliament, who's chairing the Select Committee on Constitutional Reform, that is looking at the very question, and we're taking it up in the Magna Carta, fits beautifully, should there be a new written Constitution or not? And I insisted on the words or not, because we're nonpartisan on the Magna Carta. So we'll go with the flow. But there's going to be a national debate this year on whether there should be a new Constitution or not. And of course, with the Scottish referendum coming up, it hasn't happened yet, it happens in September, and I know this podcast will be longer lasting than that. And there's the EU referendum. So we're looking at some major constitutional events coming up in this country in the next 12, 15 months.
And do you have a personal opinion? Are you willing to voice an opinion on where you stand on this debate?
I have no politics and I have no preferences, and I've resigned from several trusts that I was on, a trustee of several charities that I've been on because they might have a conflict. And so as long as I'm doing this job, I'm hands off.
Okay, well, I've got a more general question for you about the rule of law. And so I'm wondering about where you think we are regarding the accessibility of the law, and whether you think 800 years on from the Magna Carta, whether the law is still really working more in favour of the rich and the powerful than perhaps being equitable for everyone. Do you think that we've still got a way to go?
Well, I certainly do have opinions on that. And you conflated the rich and the powerful. I think probably the biggest threat is not the rich, but the powerful. Because if you have power over people's lives, then I think the rule of law becomes really terribly important. Newspapers there should be a free press, but it shouldn't be abusing the right of a free press by what it says and the biases that it has. It's very difficult to control. I spent a couple of years on the American Civil Liberties Board when I was in the United States. And the civil liberties of the individual are very important to me. It's basically my driving force, and that is supported by my commitment now in the last years of my life to the issue of the Magna Carta. The rich, I don't think, is a constitutional issue particularly. It's the right of free men and women not to be abused in either their rights or in their persons, locked up, as happens in despotic countries, without trial, without access to the law, without access to a lawyer in a secret trial. This all shouldn't be happening, wouldn't be happening if the principles of the Magna Carta were still or were instituted in the countries where these are abused.
What about the issue, though, of people being able to buy the best counsel and others, we've seen legal aid being cut, for example, and others therefore not being able to
It's better than buying judges, that's for sure. But it's a problem. It is a problem. And I was the speaker at the livery company in this country, the commercial solicitors, before contingency fees were brought in. And I said, fight contingency fees, because I was an experience of it in the United States. And it was outrageous that a solicitor had gone to a person that I had struck in the car. I stopped in 18 feet, that's how slow I was going. And the only witness who was willing to appear for that person was the brother-in-law, who was 3 cars back, and the lawyer who was taking a contingency fee. My insurance company's lawyer said, we'll pay them off, don't worry about it. I said, oh no, I will not let you pay them off. I will go to be a witness. Oh, you know, it'll take several days and so on and so forth. It's not worth it for your time. I said, I don't care. It's not right that it's done. And so I want to fight it. And of course I won, because there were 2 policemen. It was actually a policeman that I struck, and the policeman that I struck stepped back into my car, wasn't wearing his safety belt. I stopped in 18 feet, so I was clearly just going extremely slowly through an intersection. And there'd been an accident on the other side, and he just stepped back, and I just happened to catch him. I saw him in the hospital the next day. He said I called in on him, and his family were there. I said, you know, I just couldn't tell you how sorry I am. I broke his hip. And he said, no, it was entirely my fault. And yet, 3 weeks later, I get a law firm.
The power of lawyers, I think.
Power of lawyers.
Yes.
And abused.
Yes.
Abused. Yet on the other hand, when I was with the American Civil Liberties Union and was chairman of the Princeton, New Jersey chapter there at the university, we had 600 members. The number of lawyers who were absolutely willing and anxious to appear pro bono without any charge on a civil liberties First Amendment case was just amazing. I had my pick of virtually any lawyer in the community that I could call on to do this who had any expertise in it. And they were just great in defending people's. Students at a sit-in wanted me to defend them, and I said, yes, we'll certainly get you a defense, but you'll go to jail. Why? I said, because the students that want to go into the building are being deprived. We've got to look after their civil liberties too. They backed off.
Just a final question on civil liberties. Sir Tim Berners-Lee said recently that he believes there should be a Magna Carta for the World Wide Web, because he wants to enshrine the independence of this World Wide Web that he himself created. He wants a statement of principles there. He wants it to be supported by governments, by NGOs, by individuals across the world. Do you think, I mean, is this quite a persuasive, modern 21st century manifestation of the original principles of the Magna Carta?
I think, like the Prime Minister, he's jumped on a evocative phrase called Magna Carta to represent that's nothing like the Magna Carta. But Eleanor Roosevelt, you remember, in 1940, well, you won't, you're too young, in 1948 when she chaired the UN Commission on Human Rights, and it was passed by the United Nations, said this document is a Magna Carta for all mankind. That is in the cantata as a narration for the 15th of June next year. And I'm announcing worldwide for the first time that Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt Jr. is coming over to read the narration here on the 15th of June next year.
Well, that's fantastic. And I think a very interesting and positive note to end on. So, Robert, thank you very much for joining us today. That was absolutely fascinating.